episode of Grief Seeds. I am joining you live on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook to talk about something called cutting your grief cords. And this was one of four topics that was requested by Patreon supporters. So if you'd like to help me choose next week's topic, or the topic after that, or the topic after that, or if you'd like to submit your own ideas for Grief Seeds, things that we talk about here on the broadcast, I encourage you to join me on Patreon because that's where I get so many of my ideas for things to create for you. So, I want to start this broadcast by telling you two stories about disconnecting from ideas or stories that were no longer serving me in life after loss. The first of which is lighthearted, the second of which is kind of deep and dark, and it's something I really I've shared in other spaces before, but perhaps not in this way, and so it might be helpful to you. So recently, I don't know if any of you have noticed, but I did something called a color consultation. I have been telling myself this story for years and years that if I'm going to be in the grief space, if I'm going to be a proper grief professional, then I should be enrobing myself in black at all times. I've been wearing black for a long time. Um, since I was in middle school because I wanted to like be cool and look like the goth kids, and then even later in high school because I thought for some reason I thought that uh being clothed in black or wearing black gave people wisdom, or like they knew something that I didn't know. They were cool in a way I didn't understand. Um, what I now know is that there's just a lot of clothes that are offered in black, and it's like a very sleek. There's nothing wrong with the color black. Like, let me just pop it out there and say that. But gradually, what I noticed through the years, especially after my mom died in 2013, I wore black as a visible pronouncement of what I felt, who I was, and the work that I was doing in the world. And unbeknownst to me, until recently, I had walled myself off from wearing any other colors, from engaging with the possibility of other colors. Part of that was safekeeping. Part of that was I walk into a store, I see colors, I already know that's not for me. I've simplified this entire process. Just go to the black and get out of the store. It simplified the process of buying clothes. Um, but the flip side of that is that it was incredibly restrictive. And so in the past, I don't know, year or so, it started with the yellow sofa. If you've seen if you've seen the yellow sofa that's on my social media that I ordered for my new apartment in Chicago, I some part of me has been so curious about introducing or reintroducing color into my life again. I grew up as a super artistic child. I painted a lot. I drew a lot. I loved receiving those, like, I don't know if y'all remember this from the 90s, but like those fold open plastic art sets that have all the markers and the crayons and the colored pencils and the watercolors in them. I loved mine. And I loved playing with color and I loved wearing color. And I have been so just curious about interacting with color again. So it started big with the yellow sofa. And I was like, what if I started wearing more color again? And opening that up as a possibility, I realized I had tethered myself, we're going to talk about cutting cords today. I had tethered myself to this idea of if I start wearing colors, there's going to be uncertainty with that. I'm not going to know who I am. People are going to think I'm too happy in the work that I do if I show up in like bright yellow or green or blue or purple or some other kind of color or pink. God forbid, pink. I'm laughing, but holy crap, this was an existential thought that I was having. And I was like, when did I tether myself or tie myself to the idea that all I was ever allowed to do and all I was ever allowed to wear on my body was black? And that was tied to my grief and my identity and the work I did in the world and all these other important things that were larger. It was more than the shirt, it was more than the clothes. And so recently, in getting something called a color consultation, I have broken myself free or cut myself free from this tether that I am only allowed to wear black, and it is the ultimate external expression of who I am and what I do. So that's a story that I did not realize was sitting with me from like middle school and beyond. We're talking like a decade and a half here of my life that this is something I've been subscribed to. And so releasing myself from this idea, from this story that is no longer serving me. I want to try something different. I want to be somebody different. So we're talking about actions and we're also talking about identity. And I want to feel something different as well. I have never felt more artistic in my clothes than I have in the last 2 weeks after getting this color consult. I'm embracing this identity as an artist. So that's the lighthearted story about cord cutting is I am untethering myself from a story that used to serve me, was great for me in some ways, perhaps needed to be a part of my life and my identity for a while and is no longer of service. So that can be cut or severed. Those who are listening on the podcast won't see me do the scissor motion with my fingers, but cut or severed. And that can be allowed to drift away to make room for a new story, a new chord, whatever else is going to arrive to take its place. The second story I want to tell you with regard to cord cutting is a harder, darker, deeper one. And I think one that resonates with so many people who are in some sort of grief space. And this chords are energy. Energy is can be story, it can be belief system, it can be actions, it can be habits. They are things that make up the building blocks of your life. Chords and these energy building blocks are essentially like the foundational truths by which you live, the user manual by which you operate. And especially after the loss of my mom, one chord that just hurled my way and lassoed itself over its head and flung right around my waist, my solar plexus. The world is not a safe place. Do you hear my voice change when I talk about this? The world is not a safe place. It is not a safe place to be. And prior to the loss of my mother, I had operated by this other truth, this other chord was tied to me as the world is a safe, stable, predictable place to be. The death of my mother, and this cord was not made of rope. This cord was made out of thorns and blades and these things that just rested into my flesh and made me bleed and made me scared. This story, this belief system that I was tied to of the world is not a safe place was deeply embedded in the I'm like shrinking into my body as I say this, but the core of who I am, at the core of who I was in the immediate aftermath of my mother's death is the world is not a safe place. And the actions I took, the books I read, the people I interacted with, the jobs I took, the clothes I wore, everything that I operated by was informed by the fact that I was tethered to this story and to this belief, and that it had its claws or its thorns or its blades in me. I was attached to this cord. And through work with intuitive people, through my own work of reading, through the sheer, and this is a thing that happens in grief too, sometimes just the sheer act of surviving. It's like, holy crap, I've now made it 8 years after the death of my mother, 8 years and some change now, as of December. um, there becomes the possibility of another story. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the opposite. It doesn't have to be the world is a safe place, because I don't know whether or not I believe that either. But perhaps something else like it's okay to be here. Being here is not bad. Or this is a good place to be. Right here, right now is a good place to be. Or it's okay to be alive. Maybe not safe, maybe not secure. We don't know that for sure. Grief has made that so. But this is a chord that was deeply, deeply just, I mean, all consuming in the core of my body is the world is not a safe place to be. It is not safe to be here. It is not safe to be alive. Any iteration of that was a story that I was telling myself over and over and over again after the death of my mom. The world is not a safe place to be. I will be hurt. I will have things taken away from me. I will my foundational truth will be uncertainty for the rest of my life. It can't possibly get any better than this, and I don't see any form of happiness, joy, resolution, hope. Um, if this is truly what the world is, if my mother can die, if she can be taken away, if she can abandon me, there's another chord. I have been abandoned. Um, Here, if these things are true, then how can I possibly be in the world? How are me and the world aligned? And so even underneath that, the world is not a safe place to be is another chord. I do not belong here. If I'm a grieving person, if I know these things to be true, then I do not belong in the world. These are the conclusions my brain was doing its best to try to come to and make some logical sense out of grief. At the moment that it was happening, the world's not a safe place to be. Well, I'm experiencing grief in this world that is not safe. Therefore, I do not belong in this world because everybody else seems to think the world is safe. But if I'm operating by this cord, the world's not a safe place to be, then maybe I don't belong to the world at all. So these are not assumptions. They were deeper than that. They were these deeply entrenched, and I'm going to keep pointing to my chest and my entire solar plexus again because I felt them so deeply in my body. When I wrote them down or I said them out loud to myself, they felt true in those moments. And this went on for years, for years after the death of my mother. And only doing work with other intuitive people like myself, only doing reading and research and sitting at the feet of other people who had grieved no matter what their losses were, death or otherwise, um, and the sheer rebellious act of being alive after a loss demonstrated to me that maybe it was time to retire this cord. Maybe it was time to cut this cord of the world is no longer a safe place, because the longer I lived, the more I learned, the more information that arrived to me that I went out and gathered. Maybe this cord is not as true as it used to be, as it was in the very beginning, early bits and stages of my grief. And so, what I want to share with you today is, how do we cut cords? How do we release these stories, these ideas, these notions that aren't working for us anymore, that don't serve us, that don't belong, that don't inform us or help us in ways that we want to be informed and helped. So, if it's possible for you right now, wherever you're watching, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, I would love to know in the chat, what is a cord that you would like to cut today? And we can just do one. We don't have to do a bunch of them all together. It can be, I'm not allowed to wear colors. We can keep it in the shallow end of the pool. Totally fine. And of course, things like this will inform identity and inform creativity and all these other stories you tell about yourself. It can also be very deep. The world is not a safe place to be. Yeah. Yeah. It looks like Honey Who on Instagram says, I haven't figured out letting go. Whew, we can talk about that as it relates to cord cutting as well. But I wonder, or is this the story you're telling yourself? So, Honey Who, please respond. I haven't figured out letting go. Is that the story, the cord that you're attached to? Is, I haven't figured out letting go. Letting go is impossible to figure out. Is that something you deeply believe and you feel you are attached to energetically right now? Or are you struggling with the idea of, I don't know how to cut a cord because I don't trust that I can actually cut it? Because that's another thing we can talk about, and we'll get into that um, in a little bit. So I don't know the origins of cord cutting. So if anybody has any wisdom or insight about what spiritual tradition or indigenous tradition that this came from, I would love to know. So you can contact me literally on any social media, or Shelby at shelbyforsythia.com. But the way that I've seen this work and the way that it's been applied to me for myself is, you enter into a safe place in your body, in your brain, in your heart, in your soul, whatever that looks like to you. I would call up some kind of visualization for you. For me, it often looks like sitting under a big tree in the forest, moss underneath my butt, water somewhere in the distance, maybe mist or rain, something wet, something dark, something cool, something sturdy, big trees, the redwoods, if you've ever been to California. Um, and seeing them on like a misty September-ish day, beautiful and quiet. So quiet. Maybe some birds here and there, but very quiet. It's a great realm of safety and peace and possibility. A lot can happen here, but it is also just as easy to be sitting in this tranquil space. I worked with a one-on-one client once, and her safe space was a meadow in France. Just like this wildflower chalked a bug-free meadow, she said. We're taking parts of the ecosystem out for our own benefit, but a bug-free meadow. She's like, I just want to lay down in those flowers, watch the clouds go by overhead. This could be a literal space in your home, like a chair or the corner of your bedroom, or somewhere that feels safe for you to go and to belong. For other people, it is a visualization. It's something like a forest or a meadow or a river or an ocean, or somewhere that you feel very safe to be yourself. And when you enter into that space, kind of in a soft body scanning way, we don't have to check in with every part of the body. I would say, let's pinpoint the story. What's the story you're telling yourself right now about your grief, about who you are as a grieving person, about what and whom you belong to, about what matters, about what doesn't matter, about what's safe and unsafe? If you can point out the biggest story, the biggest weight. That's the word that's going to come to me right now is weight. The biggest weight that you would like to drop that no longer belongs to you. What would that be? I've worked with people in grief who've said, I am not enough. This is the end of my life. The loss of my person is the end of my life. It does not get better from here. There's no up from here. I am ruined. I am crazy. This has broken me. I am inadequate. I don't have what I need. I am not protected. I am not loved. These are all stories that have come up when I've engaged in some sort of cord cutting practice with other people. So for Henny Who on Instagram, it might be, I haven't figured out how to let go. I don't know how to do this. Might be a story that you'd like to cord cut today. And that's also okay. Like, that's allowed to be true. Um, Whatever you choose, it should be something that you can entertain the possibility of releasing. So, Henny, who just responded, my brain is too broken. Yeah, I am broken. This has broken me. Yeah, that's definitely a cord worth cutting. And here's the thing, before we get into this, we've done the body scan, we're identifying the story that we're going to release, that we're going to get rid of here. Before we do this, you do not have to, we're erasing any pressure of perfectionism, of getting it right, of getting it perfect, of doing it all the way and one time. Sometimes cords are so deep and so strong and so painful, we have to cut them over and over and over again. It's as if they lasso themselves into us, they hook in, they latch in with their teeth. We cut the cord, and 2 weeks later, they're back. My brain is broken. Oh, I thought I released that. I thought I got rid of that one. 2 weeks later, oh, my brain is broken. Lassoed right back in there with its teeth. Gotta cut it again. So cord cutting is a practice. It's not a thing that happens in one and done. But as you scan in your body, as you identify the story that you want to release, know also that within this practice, you are not required to have this be the end all be all. In fact, it will not be. So maybe cord cut yourself from that story as well. This will be the end all be all to this. This is a cord I'm consciously cutting. I'm seeing this as a story. I'm removing it from the experience that is my life. I don't have a desire to have this inform me anymore or be a baseline foundation that I stand on. And I know I'm going to have to cut it again. Maybe come in with that expectation. Yeah, getting some hearts on that one too. That's seeming to resonate with a lot of people. So as you scan your body, as you identify the cord you'd like to cut, tell me, where is it? Where does it live in your body? Is it tangled around your ankles? Is it pulling you down in a direction? Is it like a collar or a brace on your throat that is yanking you in some direction or constricting you so that you cannot breathe? Most often for me, my cords come out of this central place in my chest or even lower, like a place like my guts, like my solar plexus, like my stomach. There's almost like a wrapping around of thorns and then a lurching as if I'm being pulled forward, not of my own um, invitation, but non-consensually being yanked somewhere that I don't want to be. Second question, now that you've identified where it is, what is it made of? I'm talking about thorns for some of my biggest and worst stories. I've also heard people talk about in cord cutting steel bridge cables, like these huge, impossibly large cords that hold up and connect things. Is it that strong? Maybe weaker stories or stories in the shallow end of the pool, like I'm not allowed to wear black. That might be twine. That might be ribbon. That might be thread. That might be spider cobwebs. Like, there might be thinner substances that are clinging to you that aren't necessarily deeply entrenched. But for some of the deeply entrenched ones, I've heard people speak about cinder blocks, about cement walls, just yanking on them, swords, blades, ropes. I mean, what cords, what things can you see yourself encircled by that you want to no longer belong to you? What is it made of? And then breathing deeply in this space. Noticing, noticing all the places where your cords live, all the pain that they cause you in your body. You can bring some awareness to that. Stay with us, stay conscious, stay with us. I invite you to conjure up in your brain some kind of imagery, some machinery, some magic that allows that cord to be cut. So for thorns, for my personal one, giant hedge trimmers. Those can get through thorns fantastically. For bridge cables, how about a giant buzzsaw? Just saw that thing right away from you. For something like ribbon or thread, scissors will work just fine. And here's something else I love about cord cutting. As you're cutting away this cord, you can say something along the lines of, I release this cord from me, or this belief no longer has a hold over me. If you're finding yourself wary, I don't know how to do this, or I feel like I'm doing this all by myself, call in your loved ones who has died that would be more than willing to come to your aid right now. This can be people from your childhood who you don't see anymore. This can be people who have died and gone on, who you knew. This can also be ancestors, especially if you were talking about cutting cords from some sort of lineage. I'm gesturing and pointing behind me. Tree up, ancestral tree up. What cords are you cutting that maybe didn't even start with you? I worked with a client once who lost a very dear best friend, and she was approaching a milestone birthday. And she noticed in our session, she's like, yes, I'm grieving for the death of my friend, but what's even scarier to me is I am reaching this milestone birthday, and my whole life, my father, his parents, their parents, all the way up, have told this story that life is over at 60. It's all downhill from here. You have reached the peak excellence of your life, and now it's all bad. And she's like, that cord didn't even start with me, but it's something that I am carrying. So as you go into these spaces and cut these cords, I'm doing hedge trimmers, I'm doing scissors, I'm doing buzz saws. How do we get this thing off of you? Who can you call in to assist you in this? Whether it's somebody you love who died in life, somebody you've never met that's a part of your ancestry, you can also call in other good ancestors. People like celebrities or authors or great spiritual teachers who you feel a connection with. I imagine wherever they are in the world, if this is something you believe in, that they would be more than happy to help you. And also, I highly encourage you to call in magical beings, if this is something you can believe in, like fairies, like plants coming to your aid and breaking these binds. We've all seen the trees that grow through the man-made structures of the sidewalk. What natural elements or magical elements or people can come to your aid in this? Also animals that you have known in life or in imagination. What forces of good, of light, of benefit can help you right now? And if God or another entity is something that you believe in, you can definitely call in that as well. So as you cut these cords, as you say, this thing is no longer attached to me. I no longer want to be bound by this story. I no longer want this to be true for me. Envisioning this giant apparatus that frees you from this, acknowledging what it's like to breathe again from the throat, acknowledging what it's like to take a deep breath from your chest, maybe moving around your arms and legs a little bit because, oh my gosh, you have been freed from this thing. And seeing coming to your aid these ancestors, these fairies, these animals, these magical beings, who is coming with to help you in this, to free yourself from this story. And as that cord falls away from you, whatever it's made of, thorns, steel cables, ropes, twine, ribbon, barbed wire, watch it in your mind's eye in this safe scenery that you have created for yourself dissolve, float away, unbecome. If you're in the ocean or a river space, maybe sinking or dissolving into the water, moving away from you, being called or pulled away by the current. If you're in a place like a forest or a meadow, Dissolving into the ground like rainwater is one of my favorite visuals, the ground being thirsty and soaking up these things that no longer belong to you. If you're in a safe space within your home or you're envisioning a space that's indoors, perhaps bursting into microparticles and no longer existing. So, how can you envision this thing that once tied you, the ties that bind, um, dissolving into something that no longer affects you, that is pulled or carried away from you, that dissolves into nothing, that is soaked up by the earth? And then just allow yourself a moment or two of stillness, of feeling what it's like to have that space there where something constrictive used to be. That's right, Gigi. That space there where something constrictive used to be. It may be helpful if you're a tactile person to actually put your hands on your own body, to get in touch with your warmth, with your flesh, with your breath, to know and notice that you are no longer bound by these things, to really ground into that as a reality. And keep taking deep breaths. Thank the creatures, the beings, the ancestors who have helped come along for the ride, the loved ones who have accompanied you. Thank yourself for being willing to go on this journey in this space. And whenever you're ready, grief growers, open your eyes, return back to where you were, where you are, and take it easy. Because this is not an easy process in life after loss to cut your cords. And stay tuned for next week because we're going to talk about anchoring in with new cords. Cutting your cords is one part of the equation, but then there's kind of an emptiness that follows, vulnerability of being exposed to the world, the elements, everything around you. All of a sudden, you're like, if I'm no longer believing that the world is not a safe place to be, that was what I was anchoring into, then what? So for the next week or so, you may find yourself feeling, I'm sitting in uncertainty. I'm not sure what to do with this. Hold tight. We're coming back and we will talk about what to do in terms of anchoring in with new chords. And like I said before, this is a practice that you will have to engage with or in over and over and over again. This is I in my in my hardest and worst moments, I have often returned to the world is not a safe place for me. This is not a safe place to be. I do not belong, which are very dark, very scary, very hard in the aftermath of a loved one. Also, one specific to my mother's death, I have been abandoned. I've been left alone here. No one loves me like she could, and now that is lost. I am lost is also another chord, story, belief that I have operated by. So I'm really curious to know maybe what are some chords that you are letting go of in this call? What are some things that you are allowing yourself to release that maybe no longer resonate with your grief? And often, too, you might be cutting cords from your life before loss. You might find yourself doing that. You might find yourself cutting cords, relationships too. After the death of my loved one, I recognize I can no longer work this job. So I'm cutting the relationship I have to this job. You might recognize this person who I thought was a friend to me is no longer a friend. We talked about this last week, or they aren't an honoring or a safe place for my grief. So I might be cutting a relationship with this friend. They're not always stories, they're not always belief systems, but whatever they are, they form and inform the foundation of who you are and how you show up in the world. So whatever it is that you're releasing, relationships, jobs, connections, stories, belief systems, truths, ideologies about the world and how it works. What needs releasing? And if you don't know, if you've gone through this whole call today, if you've gone through this whole episode of Grief Seed, you're like, I don't know that I have any cords to cut. Maybe sit with yourself for a moment and say, what needs releasing that is no longer true? That's a good question to ask yourself. Maybe what no longer belongs to me, what is no longer mine to carry, is a great question. And perhaps what belief, job, relationship, identity feels too heavy to carry for another day? That's a great question to ask yourself. So maybe on Instagram, I don't remember their name now that I've said it a few times, but anywho, just scrolling up. Anywho, my brain is broken. That feels too heavy to carry for one more day. So that's a cord I'm gonna release. Maybe that one's tied around your brain. Felt headband. You feeling me? Like what do you call it? Like aerobics class in the 80s. Um, felt headband. Yeah, sweatband or something like that. What is the vice grip thing that is clinging to you so hard in your grief that you're like, I cannot carry this for another day. This does not belong to me. This is no longer who I am or who I need to be in the world. And you will be cutting cords for as long as you grieve, which is as long as you exist on the planet. There are cords I'm having to cut now with regard to my relationship to my mother 8 years later that I would have never known I had to cut or would have never considered cutting, perhaps 2 years after her death or 6 months after her death. But now it's like, especially at the beginning, the cords that I was cutting related to my relationship with her were the world is not a safe place to be. This is something that I was deeply ready to release. I'm like, I'm ready to believe the world is a safe place again, even though this is something I believe. So in the first 6 months to 2 years after my mom died, I was like, I don't want to live in a world where it's not a safe place to be. And so over and over again, I was cutting this cord. The world is not a safe place to be. Now I'm cutting so many cords with regard to my mother um, that are related to anger, of feeling abandoned or ripped off by her death. I am so um, those are chords that are no longer serving me. Can you Gigi's joining us for the call today. Um, these are chords that are no longer serving me. And they're not because they were wounding all the time, but because maybe they feel less relevant now. I have engaged as much as I need to in this time, in this moment, for the time being, right now. We can bring in that temporary language with chords related to anger with my mom. It's like I burned through all of it. And so when I release this chord of I am furiously angry with you, all I have for you is rage. Those are hard stories. They were true for me for a long time though. 6, 7 years. We're talking really recent, y'all. That's something where the divine cutter that I'm calling in is flame. Burn that away. Burn that rope off of me. Untie that from my waist and burn it all away because it is no longer relevant for me in my grief. So you can cut cords for all kinds of reasons. That no longer rings true. That does not bring me peace. That is not helping me in a way I need to be helped. And this can be friendships, jobs, relationships, um, truths, beliefs, stories, whatever you are subscribing to right now that you would like to unsubscribe from. That is the process of cutting cords in grief. So, I thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to join me, I will offer us a little benediction on our way out. If it's safe for you where you are, to close your eyes and take a deep breath in and out. My dear grief growers, may you, this week, as you listen to, watch this, examine the chords in your own life, have the clarity and insight to know what no longer belongs to you in life after loss, to recognize what you no longer need to carry, what's too heavy to come along for the ride, or simply what is no longer relevant. As you enter into this safe place where you can remove these ties that have bound themselves to you, may you feel and deeply absorb the support of whatever helpers you call into your space, whether it be your loved one, ancestors, spiritual teachers or masters that align with you, animals, magical beings. May they do all the work they can with all of their joy and love for you in your life help you to release yourself from these stories, these beliefs, these relationships that no longer serve you in your grief. As these cords fall away, as you feel what it's like to exist in a space where these cords have been removed from you, may you find rest in that openness. May you find relief in knowing that this is something that is within your power. This is something you can do. You may have to do it over and over again, but it is something you can do. It is a peace you can grant yourself after loss. And may you know that as much as this can be something you believe, you will never be left cordless. You will never be left untethered. You will never be abandoned to float aimlessly with no ties to anyone or anything. By sheer nature of existence, you are tethered to humanity. You are tethered to the earth on which you walk, on which you live. You are tethered to yourself, your own heart and soul, the people you love who live and who have died. All of these things stay and continue to inform you. May you find ease in release and know that in this way, it is possible to let go. Deep breath in with me here and out. Thank you all so much for joining me today on Grief Seeds. I really appreciate you being here. I'll see you next week.